Blessed is the kingdom of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, now and ever, and forever. Amen.
Okay, the theme of relics, it was requested. This was one of the topics that had been requested as something interesting, so why not? And then secondly, this is an interesting week because we celebrate, today we celebrate the feast of the return of St. John Chrysostom's relics to the city of Constantinople. And so I thought, well, this is an appropriate connection. The issue of relics is kind of a topic for a little bit of discussion. So this is going to be a little bit of an introduction, and we'll talk about also some of the issues and concerns, as well as some of the past history. But we will begin with prayer, and we'll pray specifically from the Vespers for the feast of St. John Chrysostom and the translation of his relics. And so you'll hear a little bit about that. And then also I will say a prayer for the repose of Isabel's mother, who fell asleep in the Lord last week. So, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. With our chants, let us celebrate the golden trumpet, the instrument played by the breath of God, the inexhaustible fount of teachings, the pillar on which the Church finds support, the abyss of wisdom, the Spirit reaching up to the heavens, the golden chalice pouring out streams of doctrine sweeter than honey, which give drink to the whole creation in their flow. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. In our hymns, let us magnify the earthly angel and heavenly man, the solitary swallow with the eloquent song, the rich treasury of virtues, the unbreakable rock, the model for every believer, the imitator of the martyrs, the equal to the holy angels, Chrysostom, who by his life imitated the divine apostles, now and ever and forever. Amen. O Chrysostom, it was not necessary for you to leave the Queen of Cities to live in Comana. Thus, under divine inspiration, a royal festival brought you back to the palace. The Church rejoices at seeing you, and she cries out with one voice, "Magnify the Lord, O my glory, who has returned to me, the friend of the bridegroom, the support of our faith, the peace of our hearts, the esteem of our honor, the height of humility, the depth of charity, the treasure of my poverty, the splendor of conversion. Thus, O venerable Father John, we beg you to ask peace and great mercy for our souls." Let us pray to the Lord. Lord, have mercy. O God of spirits and of all flesh, you trampled death and broke the power of the devil and granted life to your world. Now grant rest, O Lord, to the soul of your newly departed servant Edina, in a place of light, joy, and peace, where there is no pain, sorrow, nor mourning. As a good and loving God, forgive every sin committed by her in word, deed, or thought, since there is no one who lives and does not sin. You alone are without sin, your justice is eternal justice, and your word is truth. For you, O Christ, our God, are the resurrection, the life, and the repose of your departed servant Edina, and we give glory to you with your eternal Father, and your all-holy, good, and life-creating Spirit, now and ever and forever. Amen. Okay. as we begin, so the vesperal hymns, the first two hymns were the regular hymns that are from the feast of St. John Chrysostom. And then the third one was composed specifically for the return of his remains to the Queen of Cities, Constantinople, the same city that kind of, well, kicked him out, at least the royal family did. And so it's obviously written by someone in Constantinople. But however, at this point, already Constantinople had turned around. They had definitely formed a much closer relationship to John Chrysostom as one of its bishops. And so 33 years after John dies, near the city of Comana, which is in Armenia, he dies on the way to his exile. And this was his second exile. He had been greatly weakened, and it was also a difficult time of year to be traveling and going through the mountains. And so all that took its toll on him and brought him to a premature death for sure. But that was already the importance of relics is very much evident in a feast that celebrates his relics being brought back, his remains being brought back to the city of Constantinople. And relics are a very important part of our church history. And culturally speaking, religiously speaking, every religious tradition has some sense of relics. Now, relics are, in the most general definition, you could say, so not a specifically Christian or Catholic definition, they are mementos. They are things which bring one back to a specific place or time or person or event. And so obviously as a civilization, humankind remembers. And so hence in the variety of religious traditions, from the most ancient, we already find some idea of relics and the veneration of the remains of esteemed and holy ones. So we know, for example, that the relics of Buddha, who lived before Christ, the relics of his body are also conserved. We also know that Confucius, his remains were also venerated specifically by the royal court in China. However, those realities are removed from our context. Our context really connects us closely. If we're going to go look somewhere, then we have to look in the Old Testament. And although in the Jewish tradition, there is not a specific doctrine or dogma that is spoken about or established regarding relics per se, or the keeping of relics. We do know that within modern Judaism, for example, the rabbis who have been venerated, in the last 1,000 years, their tombs are places of pilgrimage. And so, although they may not be, in the sense, collecting relics or sending a relic to a synagogue, that would not be done. However, it is about the respect and the veneration for the remains. That's where that, you could say, dogmatic approach or understanding would be revealed. So when we go to the Old Testament, the most important example in the Old Testament of relics and what can be done through the relics of the saints, we find in the second book of Kings in chapter 13. And this is exactly the understanding that the early church had as far as why relics. Elisha died and was buried. At the time, bands of Moabites used to raid the land every year. Once, some people were burying a man when suddenly they spied such a raiding band. They cast the dead man's body into the grave of the prophet Elisha, and everyone hurried off. But when the man came in contact with the bones of Elisha, he came back to life and rose to his feet. And so there we see that is the clearest example of really the foundation for the Christian understanding of relics. So going specifically then, looking at the importance of relics, I guess we can start with at least the categories that we're familiar with. Christian relics are classified into three groups. The first class relic is, generally speaking, anything directly associated with Jesus. And so that could be the cross. It could be a thorn from the crown of thorns. It could be his tomb in Jerusalem. So even places, even items, even buildings, or like you could say that even the synagogue that is preserved in Nazareth, in the Byzantine Catholic Church there, that synagogue where Jesus prayed, that could be considered in this definition a relic, a first-class relic. Then first-class relics are also any physical remains of a saint. And so specifically bone or hair, etc. So from the body. A second-class relic would be items that are owned by a saint. So clothing or a book or anything that saint would have used in their life. And then third-class relics are anything that is touched to a first-class relic. So those are the three kinds of groupings that we build upon when we look at this. So the saints were important because they're friends of God, they're soldiers of Christ. And from the earliest days of Christianity, we find that saints are being venerated, especially the martyrs. Not only are their remains venerated, but when they're buried in the catacombs, and we see this specifically in Rome, that's where it is best preserved. However, there are catacombs in North Africa, in the Middle East, and in these places, many of these catacombs have not been excavated, or access to them is limited. However, we do know from Rome, where the catacombs are best preserved, that on top of the places where people who were martyrs were buried was usually on the ground above them was a shrine of some sort, so a monument or a marker. And then underground, Christians would go there to pray. And they prayed around the remains, the burial places of these martyrs, because the martyrs were the heroes. They were, you could even say, the superheroes of the faith. They were the ones who went and accepted suffering and death. And the way that the Romans executed early Christians was, very, very rough, very difficult. And so they underwent torture and sufferings, and then willingly died because of their faith. So they became themselves the embodiment of sacrifice. And so they gave themselves to God all the way unto death. And because of that, and most Christians were living difficult lives, as is, living underground and secretly, but most Christians did not wish to be caught and to die a martyr's death. And so, however, they greatly loved and respected those who were able to do that. And those who were able to do that were the example to be followed. The apostles, of course, were that first generation who connected the early Christians to Jesus directly, but they were also, with the exception of John, they were also martyrs. But then the second and the third generation of Christians who had converted, especially those converting from paganism, they brought a whole different dimension to the people in the cities, because they were related to many of the people, of Rome and of Carthage, of other capitals, other cities. And so the connection was a deep personal connection. Christians sought to be not only to venerate or visit and pray at the tombs of these martyrs, but they also sought to be buried close to them. And so in many catacombs, we'll find central points, a central, not really a chapel, but a larger room where there is a martyr buried. And then there are a great abundance of other niches that are placed close to where that martyr is, because it was considered a great honor to be buried in close proximity to that saint. We find, and this is an interesting conversation also, historically speaking, because Protestantism and specifically Luther had great issues with the cult of saints and with the veneration of saints, with relics, and there is a reason for it, which we'll get into a little later, because everything that starts out good doesn't always end good. And so, although the understanding and the place of martyrs within the church in this first and second and third centuries, the place of the martyrs is very important and essential. And the veneration of their remains, their relics, are also very essential. With time, things do get a little bit distorted. The earliest information that we find about the veneration of a saint is actually from the life of Saint Polycarp of Smyrna. Smyrna is today Izmir in Turkey. And Saint Polycarp was martyred around the year 156, and a very detailed hagiography was written up. And a hagiography, it's the story of the saint. And it became a new genre of Christian literature. St. Polycarp's is the oldest that we know of. And so after St. Polycarp, who was the bishop of the city of Smyrna, was burnt at the stake, so we hear that one of his disciples after being interrogated by the Roman soldiers, went and I quote, took up his bones, which are more valuable than precious stones and finer than refined gold, and he laid them in a suitable place where the Lord will permit us to gather ourselves together in gladness and joy to celebrate the birthday of his martyrdom. And so it gives us, there's a couple of very important pieces of information when it comes not only to relics, but also to the veneration of the saints. Firstly, the veneration of the martyrs, the celebration of the martyrs, and the placement of the feast day of the saint being the day of the saint's martyrdom. And we find this in the earliest texts referring to the martyrs. So they're and I've seen this unfortunately mistranslated or misunderstood, but in the martyrologies, which is the long list of the different martyrs, so the city of Rome has it written as Dies Natalis, which is the day of birth. Unfortunately, some people have read that literally and taken it to be as birthday, but it's not. It's birth into eternal life. And so it is the day of death. And so most saints appropriately are celebrated on the day of their death. And now that has changed in modern times a little bit, but I think generally speaking, even with some of the new saints, that is still the case. But especially when we go back to the older saints, so we find out, we celebrated, for example, the feast of St. Basil the Great on January 1st. And, and St. Basil is placed right on the feast of the circumcision of Jesus, which is according to the Jewish tradition, the child would be circumcised on the 7th day after his birth and also named. And so that would be the case with Jesus. And so unfortunately for St. Basil, he died on January 1st. And so he is forever associated with the circumcision. And it's become such an issue that I have even seen in church bulletins, I have even seen it listed as kind of a mixed up feast where it becomes the circumcision of St. Basil, which I assure you it was not. And, but that's, since he died on that day, and because the feast of the circumcision is not a great holy day, it's just a solemn feast day. So were it like Christmas Day, then his feast would have been moved. But as is the case actually with St. John Chrysostom, he died in September on the feast of the dedication of the Church of the Resurrection, and so his feast then was moved to November for the Byzantine and Orthodox churches. And so that would happen. However, generally speaking, again, the saint is celebrated on the day of his birth or her birth into eternal life. The understanding was that the saints could perform miracles. This is what we get out of just the basic reading of the martyrdom of Saint Polycarp. The saints can perform miracles, or rather, miracles are performed through their intercession because they are close to God. God grants their prayer. So it's not they who are healing, but it is rather they who in their proximity to God, personal proximity to God, they can assist us by interceding for us. And so the power that they have is not really from them, but it is a power that is worked through them, that God works through them. And so these persons who are recognized as saints, who have lived a life that is worthy of God, and who are known to the Christian community as saints and are venerated publicly, these are the ones that we can turn to and whose relics are very important to the life of the church. St. Augustine wrote in the 5th century, "When we make our offerings at shrines, we make our offerings to God. The martyrs have their place of honor, but they are not adored in the place of Christ." So already the distinction is being made. I think human nature being, what it is, that these are distinctions. When the fathers, like Augustine, begin to talk about this, so that means that there was some question. That usually means that somebody was taking it the wrong way. And of course, that generation in the 4th century of Christians who were coming from paganism, from Greco-Roman religion, which worshiped many gods and goddesses and had a very different religious culture. For those people coming out of that, it was very easy for them to, see Mary as a goddess because she's the mother of God, and then the saints as being somehow lesser gods. And so the fathers spoke very quickly to redirect that veneration so that it was understood that, these are the friends of God, they are not God. Mary is the mother of God in a unique way. Of course, they had to then explain that specifically in the councils. Now, other fathers have also spoken in the same period. St. Gregory of Nyssa in the 4th century recorded, "Their ashes and all that the fire had spared have been distributed throughout the world, so that almost every province has had its share of the blessing. I also myself have a portion of this gift, and I have laid the bodies of my parents beside the relics of these warriors." And he is talking about the remains of martyrs who were burnt by the Romans. And so, the ashes were collected with whatever remained of the bodies, fragments of bone, and they were divided up and sent to every province. And the remains were called a blessing. Now, other fathers also provided even more instruction. St. Jerome, for example, instructed us, "We do not worship, we do not adore, for fear that we should bow down to the creature rather than to the Creator. But we venerate the relics of the martyrs in order to better adore him whose martyrs they are." Cyril of Alexandria wrote, "We by no means consider the holy martyrs to be gods, nor are we wont to bow down before them adoringly, but only relatively and reverentially." So, see, and he even mentioned specifically they are not gods. So what they were contending with was a change in some of the religious culture. But the martyrs become for the early church I did not do that. Don't know who did that. So the tradition of celebrating the liturgy on an altar that is blessed and consecrated with holy oil, with chrism, and then it has laid within it relics, and specifically the relics of the martyrs, because since the liturgy, since the Mass is an unbloody sacrifice, we connect ourselves to the sacrifice of Christ by repeating his words, by repeating his actions. And so there is not the traditional Old Testament idea of sacrifice, and yet it is an altar upon which sacrifice is made. So it's based on the Old Testament idea of the altar. And so the consecration of an altar involves then laying into it and literally cementing into the altar stone fragments of martyrs, so relics of martyrs, that the liturgy or the Mass is then celebrated upon them, because it is their faith and the fact that they gave their life unto death. They gave their life for their faith in Jesus Christ and in the resurrection. And so they are uniquely connected to the Christian church from the very beginning. That's one of the reasons why the first churches that were built after the legalization of Christianity. So the legalization of Christianity occurs in the Roman Empire in the year 313 with the Edict of Milan. And the Emperor Constantine, who has just had a vision and has found out through his mother that his victory came through a revelation of Jesus Christ and his cross. So he, without understanding, he legalizes the Christian faith. And the first places that are built as public places of worship, because up until that point, Christians were persecuted and were primarily worshiping in private homes that were outfitted for Christian worship, but homes where it could also be easily covered up so that there would not be problems. There were places that had been built as churches. We do have a few of them, such as I had mentioned before, the church in Dura Europos in what is today Syria. That is one of the few exceptions that we have, because perhaps it was possible to establish a church there since that area was so far away from Rome, where persecutions of Christians were rather common. However, in Rome itself, with the legalization of Christianity, the natural spot to build churches were the places where the saints, the martyrs, were buried, or where they had been executed, because the earth had their blood in it. And so the first churches that we find being built under the sponsorship of Constantine is St. Peter's, which is built above the shrine of St. Peter, where his remains were entombed in the Vatican catacombs. And this is then followed in many other places as the way of establishing a church upon the tombs of the saints, and at this time specifically the martyrs. There were not many saints at this time who didn't die as martyrs. And so most of the saints were martyrs because Christianity was persecuted. So the issue, though, of this connectedness to the bodies of the saints, not quite a perfectly resolved issue, because the culture of the Romans and the Greeks who were becoming Christians, they did not have the same respect towards the body as Judaism and Jewish Christianity and early Christianity did. And so the tradition among the Romans was cremation of the body. And for the Jews and the Christians, many of the Jews, not all the Jews, but many of the Jews believed that resurrection on the last day would involve the body, and hence one has respect for the body and buries the body in a way that the body is not destroyed except by nature itself. And so one doesn't go then and, of course, cremate the body. And so because of that understanding, the early Christians and the leaders, the bishops of the church, were clear on the importance of the body and the bodies of the saints. Some of the converts who were coming from pagan traditions did not have the exact same understanding. And it seems that they may have struggled a little bit with it, because we find around the year 340, in the Synod of Gangra, which was a synod of local bishops in one province in North Africa, they decree excommunication against Christians who disrespect and despise relics. So that was apparently, it was a problem. And however, it became much more the norm as far as the religious culture and the faith of the church is concerned. In the 4th century, so shortly after that synod, we find a text from a Byzantine historian, Evagrius Ponticus, and he wrote about the shrine of the martyr Saint Euphemia, whose tomb was in the town of Chalcedon, close to Constantinople. And he described how people would come to the church, the basilica, and with the assistance of the priests, they would lower into the tomb a sponge on a string, and that would be lowered all the way into the tomb, and then it would be brought out, and the faithful would then, it would be cut up, and then the faithful would each take a little piece of that sponge that had been touched to the body, to the bones of Saint Euphemia. And so, and I'm bringing this specific case up because this basilica with the body of Saint Euphemia, which the body of Saint Euphemia, I believe today is in the cathedral in Athens. But at that time, that place was such an important place of pilgrimage, and these little particles that were picked up by the sponge as it was lowered into the tomb became a relic. It's a 3rd-class relic, with possibly having on it 1st-class relic, dust from the bones, from the body. This basilica was the place where the Council of Chalcedon took place. And so in the year 453. And so it was a very important place of pilgrimage. It was recognized because the council would take place there. And it shows the trend of how relics were becoming much more a part of not only pilgrimage, not only liturgical life as a part of, having altars consecrated with relics of martyrs, but now already prior to the year 400, we find this example of people who are taking little relic souvenirs. They're taking them home. And so there is already veneration that is happening at home. And so obviously, this is just one of many, because as we go on into the 5th and 6th centuries, we begin to see the what is called the relic trade become a thing. And unfortunately, the different monasteries, some of them abused that, but others found different ways, such as I think the sponge is one of the ways. Other monasteries offered as a third-class relic oil that had been burned in lamps by the tomb of the saint. And so you had many different types of relics that people could take home for their own personal piety and devotion and prayer. Jumping ahead a little bit, though, in the year 789, Charlemagne, in his Admonitio Generalis, which is a very apt title, general warnings. So he writes about false saints, fake martyrs, the selling of relics, and that these saints are not to be added on to local veneration. He's basically telling the priests and bishops, if you haven't heard of a saint, don't add him to your calendar. Make sure that you know who you're adding on. And, because there was already this abuse, that there were people who were peddling fairy tales. And in Europe, in all honesty, too, in that period, you still did have witch doctors and witchcraft and, other pagan traditions. And so naturally, there would be some synthesis that would happen in areas which were just recently Christianized. The other abuses that we see in this period, so 800 to about the year 1000, we see other abuses coming up, such as the selling of relics, so specifically tied to, a price tag. Then the selling of tickets to get access to relics. So this is still happening, unfortunately, but we're not going to go there. That's not the theme tonight. And then there are examples of discrimination, which, for example, in the 9th century in the Fleury Monastery in France, women were not admitted to venerate the relic of Saint Benedict. And so, these were things which were also very scandalous, since similarly to our day, churches were filled primarily with women. You had men too, but women were the more faithful, the more faith-filled, the more involved, and so it became kind of a big issue when this monastery took the decision of not letting women venerate its relic. And so the monastic centers, though, became the place where relics were brought and venerated, and then the monks created pilgrimages around these relics. They also created feast days. As this is happening, so in the around the year 1000, the instructions come from the Holy See that canonizations are to be done by local bishops. And with the structure being as it was, you would have every region has an archbishop with a number of dioceses, suffragan bishops underneath. And so you would have an archdiocese and then a bunch of dioceses. And within that province, they were to make sure that any canonization that took place was legitimate. The bishop or the archbishop became responsible for the distribution of the hagiography, the life story of the saint, and then also for the distribution of relics. The distribution of relics served a couple of purposes. Firstly, it encouraged piety among the faithful. Secondly, it also was a way of encouraging people to pray to the saint for miracles so that the fame of the saint could grow. And so that is why, for example, when you go to some of the great places of pilgrimage in Europe, you see centuries of gifts that have been left behind, and even the very building itself, what may have begun at one time as a small church, has now grown into a much bigger church because of the number of people who come there to venerate the saint. A very good example of that is St. Nicholas. St. Nicholas, who came to Italy as really an obscure saint, unknown in the West, until his relics were brought to southern Italy, to Bari, in the year 1081. And through miracles, through the relics were sent from Bari to the first, I believe the first chapel dedicated to St. Nicholas was at the cathedral of the city of Worms in Germany. And from there began miracles and the telling of his story. And it was a story which was very easy to read, because Nicholas was a simple bishop. He was not known as a great orator or preacher. He did not write theological texts. And then the stories about what he did as a pastor rendered him very approachable. And so his fame grew. And so, and he's one of those examples of a saint who becomes well known outside of his own environment and element. The other, I think, most important relic that we know of is the relic of the true cross. And we give credit to Saint Helena, the mother of Constantine, who went to the Holy Land to mark the sites associated with the life of Jesus. In the same way, everything that is associated, all the buildings that are associated with Jesus, are considered first-class relics. And so those of you who have been to the Holy Land and have seen the buildings, the remains of the buildings, the steps from the house of the high priest, and other places where Jesus is said to have walked. So all these places are considered first-class relics. Helena goes to the Holy Land and she brings back things. And this is another example that I think impacted Christians. The idea of bringing, instead of leaving it there and establishing like a place of pilgrimage where one would go to reverence, the things associated with the life of Jesus, she found things. She built a few churches over the places where, like around the tomb, over the cave of the Nativity in Bethlehem. So she did build all these things and find these places with the help of the local Christian population who remembered where all these things had taken place. But she also took a bunch of stuff with her. And so I think that sets the Christian church up for that long tradition of taking souvenirs from holy places. Don't know how to say it nicely, but it's because it sounds pretty bad. But the reality is, she brought these things to Rome as a way of connecting the Christian faith of Rome to the Holy Land. And it was a way of also, again, spreading the good news. So she took the cross, the pieces of the true cross that she had found, left a piece in Jerusalem, then went to Cyprus. On Cyprus, they reloaded with some food and water, and there she left another piece of the true cross to the local Christian community. And today on that spot, there is an enormous monastery of the Holy Cross with the original relic from St. Helena still in the church for veneration. And then she went to Rome. In Rome, she unloaded not only the wood of the cross, but she also brought with her the sign which was on the cross, which said, "This is the King of the Jews, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." And the sign is in Greek, Latin, and Aramaic, written in Hebrew characters. So not in Hebrew itself, but in Aramaic, but with the use of Hebrew letters. And the sign, the cross, that is today still kept in the Basilica of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem, Santa Croce in Jerusalem, which is in the city of Rome, and which was the house of the Empress Helena. She also brought with her the steps, the stone steps, which were to the Praetorium. And those are known as the Holy Steps that are by the Lateran Basilica. She also brought with her the nails from the cross, and I believe also part of the crown of thorns. A lot of these relics eventually were taken to the city of Constantinople, although the steps were left as well as the sign, because I think that the relics were very important also for the city's own spiritual well-being. If the royal family, when Constantine sets off for Constantinople, if they would have taken everything with them, then there probably would have been a revolt in Rome against Christianity. And so this way, the relics were split between Constantinople and Rome. The problems, I guess, start really with you could say not problems, but the interesting part of the history begins than with the Crusades. The Crusades that go to attempt to free the Holy Land, they come in contact with a lot of the local Christian population. And the Christians living in the Holy Land, but also in other parts, like in Egypt or in Syria or in Lebanon. In those areas, they are under Islam, and so their activity as Christians is greatly diminished, and they can't have great pilgrimages. There is a lot of tension. The presence of the Crusaders doesn't necessarily help because they come from outside, and of course they set the balance off, because in many places, such as the city of Damascus, Christians and Muslims were living reasonably well together. And so when the Crusaders come from Europe, things change. And many of the Christians become entangled in things that are happening politically with the Crusaders. A lot of this causes both a migration of some people to the West with the Crusaders, but primarily there is a migration of relics. And so a lot of the saints that have been through the previous 1,000 years, all of a sudden the Christians are not able to protect their relics, their tombs. And so very often parts of the relics are given to the Crusaders to take to the West. And the Crusaders, no doubt in my mind, they also pay for these relics, because the financial plight of Christians living under Islam was not the greatest. And so financially, they were not an influential community. And so the money no doubt helped. And this is why we begin to see in the 12th century, we begin to see many relics arriving in monasteries, and they are relics that are coming directly from the Holy Land, including relics of St. Mary Magdalene, as well as St. James, as well as other lesser-known biblical saints. Some of the more wild relics that are coming into monasteries are in the monastery of Saint Médard in France. They had at this time in the 1200s one of Jesus's milk teeth. Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, you think about it, there isn't really any relic of Jesus's body. And so, because he ascended into heaven. So there's that. And so, the things such as a tooth is, interesting. I wish I could say that was the least of them. It gets worse. Two monasteries, and this is, leave it to the French. Two monasteries in France, the Abbey of Charroux and the Abbey of Coulomb, both claim to have the holy foreskin. Yeah, well, that is, the Middle Ages. Some of that, now I'm mentioning this not because of, because I want to make fun of it, but rather I think some of this will help us understand why the Reformation turned against saints and the relics so strongly. Because in the Middle Ages, it had become competitive between these monasteries and cathedrals to have relics, have important relics, have better relics. And so, and that kind of competition is not godly, and it's going to lead them down the wrong path. And so this is how you get into it. Some monk thought that it was a good idea to invest in the holy foreskin. I mean, somebody paid for this, I'm sure, but they were peddling relics. These relics were being sold and traded, and it's a shame. And just as a footnote for all of us who were laughing about the French thing, the last monastery, all the other monasteries no longer have those relics. Well, because they're no longer monasteries, but at some point those relics were lost. There was a small monastery in Italy that claimed to have the holy foreskin too. However, they were like latecomers. They came up with this in the 1600s, and that relic was stolen from their monastery church in 1984 and has not been recovered. And I don't know how you ensure that, but that's different. The other churches, though, with the Crusades, other churches did have more legitimate relics and items. So the Cathedral of Chartres, which is very famous for its beauty, has a piece of cloth which is called the tunic of the Mother of God. The table of the Holy Family, a panel of wood that the wood has been tested and does indeed come from the Holy Land close to the time of Jesus. So that table, an icon was painted on it, and it is today, that table is enshrined in Poland, and it is the national Madonna of Poland, Our Lady of Czestochowa. So that is also considered a relic, not just because of the painting, but because it was painted on a panel of wood that is purported to be from the house of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. In 1248, King Saint Louis IX built the Church of Sainte-Chapelle. And this church was actually built as a building reliquary. So it holds thorn from the crown of thorns and many, many other relics. And it kind of shows in the 1300s how the market of relics was. That a king would build, that is one of the most beautiful churches in the world. And he would build that at his own expense to house a collection of relics. It goes to show that the flow of relics, especially from the Crusades and after the Crusades, was quite a big deal. Feasts and pilgrimages were the norm, and the stories, of course, of these different saints and relics and the miracles that were worked through these relics, they just continued to multiply. And I would be remiss not to mention also one of the big factors, or one of the big events. In 1204, the Crusaders, who were returning from the Holy Land after a failed attempt to gain some foothold in the Holy Land, they stopped at Constantinople, where they were received as Christians, as fellow Christians, although there was a separation at that time between Rome and Constantinople. And the Crusaders came there and they decided to sack the city. And so that which became known as the Fourth Crusade that occurred, taking the city, some of the city's most important relics and treasures. And as the city's apostle is the Apostle Andrew, and so his relics were taken and brought to southern Italy, close to Naples. And then St. John Chrysostom, his body, whose feast we are celebrating today, his body was taken from Constantinople, where it was laid in the Basilica of the 12 Apostles. It was taken to Venice. St. Basil was also taken, St. Gregory the Theologian. Long list of saints were removed from the city. And then besides that, they took a lot of other treasures, including miracle-working icons, chalices, and even the main two front doors of the cathedral of the city, Hagia Sophia. The two doors, which are monumental and massive and solid, both of these doors with the images of the 12 apostles on them, were taken and put into the cathedral of the city of Sorrento, I think. So that's one of the big historical events that also does impact the movement of relics. I would like to share, just as a footnote. So we have, this is the icon of our patron saint, St. John Chrysostom, with the relic right there placed in a teca, in a little jeweled box. The relic, this relic we received from the Vatican, and it was a relic that was given. It's a fragment of bone. It was given to our sister parish, St. Basil the Great, in Irving, Texas. A number of years ago, some of you might remember, we had a similar icon like this, a little smaller, done by the same iconographer with the reliquary, and it was stolen. And we did not get it back. And we did find out subsequently that our founding pastor, at the time, he requested the relics from the Vatican for us, and also for St. Basil's in Irving. And so when our relic was lost, so the parish in Irving gifted us with the relic that came from the very same time. And so the body of St. John Chrysostom did find its way eventually to Rome. And so he was brought to Rome, and then from Rome, most of his body was returned to Constantinople about 20 years ago. The other relic, it would be easy to go through. It would not be easy to go through the whole list of relics, and I could sit here for hours telling you who is. That's why God created the internet. Google it. If you're looking for a saint, Google him or her. But there are some interesting relics, and one of the relics that I find fascinating is the relic of the head of John the Baptist. And John the Baptist, when he was beheaded at the order of Herod Antipas around the year 28 or 30, he was being held in prison because he spoke very publicly to Herod's face about Herod's marriage. And in criticizing Herod, Herod, who feared him, had him imprisoned just so that he would be not so controversial and he would not cause him public embarrassment. We all know the story. Herod's stepdaughter entertains at Herod's birthday party, and Herod is so mesmerized by her performance that he promises her anything that she wants. And so she goes to her mother, who is Herod's actual wife, and who it was the one who was most bitter, apparently, about John the Baptist's critical comments. And she tells her daughter, ask Herod for John's head on a silver platter. And so, John is executed. And initially, although his body is buried in one place, his head is elsewhere. And somehow it finds its way to a number of different places. And so this is where it starts to get interesting. So the head of John the Baptist finds its way to Constantinople eventually. It is in Constantinople. It comes also with the silver platter, and it is one of the items that is taken from Constantinople in 1204 at the Fourth Crusade. It is taken from Constantinople to the cathedral of the city of Amiens. They still have the relic of St. John's head in Amiens. There is another problem, though. The problem is that in the late 11th century, the Byzantine emperor decides to, and this was not anything uncommon, it just had not been done in a few decades. He decides to have one of his secretaries make an account of all the relics that are held in the city of Constantinople. And so when he makes this list of all the heads, of all the relics in the city of Constantinople, he discovers that there is a little bit of a problem. The problem is that there are in his list actually 3 heads of John the Baptist, all in Constantinople. And so the explanation that is made in the notes of the secretary is that just as God saw fit to multiply the loaves and the fishes, so has he multiplied, because of the strong faith of the people, so has he multiplied the heads of John the Baptist. Yeah, I don't know how that's going to go. The problem is that there's nothing changes about the multiplication. So there is a head of John the Baptist in Amiens. There is a head of John the Baptist in the Basilica of St. John of the Lateran, the cathedral of the city of Rome. There is a head of St. John the Baptist in the Church of St. Sylvester in Rome, which is one of the ancient churches. And then there is a head of John the Baptist in the Munich Residence Museum, which has the treasures of the Bavarian royal family, and among it, there is John the Baptist's head. So, yeah, there's a few. And however, I haven't mentioned the one that is actually, I think, probably the real thing and the most interesting. In the Umayyad Mosque of Damascus, which is the Great Mosque of Damascus, it is one of the oldest mosques in Islam. It was completed in the year 715. In the year 634, Damascus fell to the Muslims and was taken over peacefully. They surrendered. And so the Christians in Damascus lived a rather normal life in comparison to many other places at that time. The cathedral of the city of Damascus was the cathedral of St. John the Baptist. And it had as its prized treasure the relic of the head of John the Baptist. And the history is actually quite traceable. The cathedral was built there in the 4th century, and the relic came to Damascus relatively early. Already we find indications of its presence in the 3rd century in the city amongst the Christians of the city of Damascus. When the Umayyad Mosque was built, it was built on the spot of the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. The many parts of the cathedral were incorporated into the mosque. And so, for example, when you walk around the mosque, it's very normal to find inscriptions in Greek and even in Aramaic. And inside the mosque itself, and this is something beautiful. I would, right now we can do a lot of virtual tourism. This is one place that is worth seeing. In the courtyard of the mosque, there are magnificent mosaics that were probably done as a collaboration with Byzantine mosaicists. The building itself is remarkable for something that was built in the early 8th century. Its central focal point is a shrine, a little building with a dome. The building has glass that is tinted green. And inside there is what looks like a sarcophagus, kind of a tomb that is covered with a cloth that it has embroideries on it in Arabic. All references to John the Baptist that come from the Quran. And inside that shrine is the relic of the head of John the Baptist. Now, the place is a place of pilgrimage for Christians as well as Muslims. When you go there, there are always people there, always praying there. And John the Baptist is revered as a prophet in the Islamic tradition too. And so you will find poets and singers who are sitting at this not tomb, but at this reliquary, you could say, reliquary building, sitting next to it, singing the praises of John the Baptist, who in the Islamic tradition is known as Yahya, because in the Arabic Christian tradition, he is Yohanna. So there's a different way of saying the name. The interesting, so this has been there, this shrine has been there within the mosque since the early 700s. And before that, it was in that same place in the church from the 4th century. and it has never been removed or taken out. There have been embellishments placed on the shrine. The shrine is currently in a building that is from the 19th century. But the interesting thing is that in the 80s, there was a movement which within what was happening in many parts of Islam. It's kind of coming out of Saudi Arabia, and it was Saudi Arabia and Egypt. And it was looking to cleanse Islam from things that were not according to the Muslim tradition. One of the issues was the placement of a tomb inside a mosque. This was something that was forbidden. And so 3 imams, those would be Islamic preachers, Muslim preachers, teachers, preachers. 3 imams came at night to this shrine of St. John the Baptist. And when the mosque was closed, they had decided to remove the shrine. Since it was not supposed to be there, it was not according to the Muslim tradition. And so they brought with them the necessary tools to destroy and dismantle the shrine. And then basically when the first one lifted a hammer to break through the shrine itself, when he lifted the hammer, a bolt of light came through the entire mosque, and it completely blinded the 3 imams. And so that was pretty much the end of their excursion. And the 3 of them, they've all passed away since. However, the 3 spent the rest of their lives sitting next to the tomb, next to the shrine, and singing in Arabic poetry about John the Baptist. And when I was there in 94, and so there were 2 of them there, and the color out of their irises had been completely was gone. It was just white. It was really, really incredible to see that. And so I would say based on that, we kind of know which place has the head of John the Baptist. I would say all the other pretenders need to give it up. So I do want to share with you a couple of things. That's kind of, I'm closing with John the Baptist because I think that is the most interesting story from our time, and something that in the Middle East caused quite a commotion, as you can imagine, because that kind of stuff doesn't happen very often, and it was also, I think, a pronouncement against some of the extremism that was being pushed at that time. So I wanted to share with you a few things. In our churches, we use what is called an antimension. It is a piece of cloth that has depicted on it the placing of Christ in the tomb, and then at the bottom of the antimension is stitched into it, a relic of a martyr. Well, in this case, so depends on, I guess, on who does the stitching. In this case, it is right on the cross. So this is the Antimencion. And then right here in the cross is where the relic is stitched in. This is also signed at the bottom. It is signed by bishop, and then this one has the relic of Saint Josaphat in it, always a martyr. And so that is on, for the Divine Liturgy, we can celebrate the Divine Liturgy only on the Antimencion. So if, like for Byzantine liturgy, and we'll talk about this when we get into the study of the liturgy. So the Antimencion, it does travel, which I think is one of the reasons why it is on cloth, so that a priest can take it to different places when he needs to celebrate the liturgy. And it is specifically to the liturgy. So other services can be done, but the liturgy must always be celebrated on this Antimencion, which is similar to the altar stone that is used in Roman Catholic churches. The altar stone that has the relic also of a martyr. Then I wanted to show you, so this would have been a priest's cross. This is from Syria. It is from the 6th century, and it has within it, at one time it held relics. And this was the tradition. Eventually in the West, the tradition became that the bishop would wear a pectoral cross. In the East, so all priests wear a pectoral cross, and then a bishop wears a pectoral cross as a sign of his priesthood, but he also wears a panagia, which is a large medallion that has the image of the Mother of God and Christ on it. And the tradition was that because the cross had the relic, so whenever the faithful would meet the priest, so instead of shaking the priest's hand, they would kiss the cross. So because it had the relics. Whose relics, I don't know. This was found without the relics in it. The use of third-class relics are even, like I said, it can even be holy water. So this is a vial of water from Istanbul, from Constantinople, where the Mother of God appeared, the Mother of God life-giving font that is celebrated on Friday after Easter. For many of the newer saints, so you can get, I received this from the Sisters of Mother Teresa, the Sisters of Charity, this little image, and it has here at the bottom, you can see a little circle, and on the back, it has actually the seal, and the seal says what it is, and it is from the clothing of Mother Teresa. And so that makes it a second-class relic. Then the tradition of taking a sponge, as we heard from that text in the 4th century, taking the sponge and lowering it into the relics, the tomb of Saint Euphemia. So that is still done in some places in Greece and in the Middle East. And then what they do is that they put usually it's cotton, and they'll take the cotton and they put it into a little piece of cloth that has a cross on it. And so then it's given like this. And so it comes in its own box. But so this piece of cotton was touched to the relics of Saint Demetrius in Thessaloniki in northern Greece. And now the relics that we're most familiar with come either in this form. So this is the way that they are prepared in Rome. There's an order of nuns that have the specific responsibility of taking care of the relics, and then when a request is made of the Vatican for relics, they will put the relics by hand, take a scraping off of the bone, and they will put it into this kind of a container or into this kind of container. This is a teca. And this kind of a container, this is actually sheepskin. And then it is sewn into place with the relics glued in. And then in the back is the seal. That's where all the threads are tied together. And then the seal is specifically of the convent. So it shows that they were the ones who did it. Why is this necessary? Well, because there is a market that goes around selling a lot of relics. And unfortunately, I mean, all you have to do is search relics on eBay, and you'll see a whole bunch of really questionable stuff. And a lot of gullible people who are buying them, so it's very difficult to get relics, and that's probably a reason for why the market is the way it is. But when I was a student seminarian in Rome, so through our rector, we were able to request relics, and so I was able to get a larger reliquary that has a number of different saints in it and little fragments of bone. And this one is Saint Basil the Great, Saint Ignatius of Antioch, Saint John Chrysostom, Saint Athanasius, Saint Cyril of Alexandria, Saint Gregory of Nyssa, and Saint Nicholas of Myra. So I got all of my favorite saints. And that's, unfortunately, that no longer is possible. I think that they've restricted that quite a bit. However, with the new saints, with the new ones who are being prepared for canonization, the blesseds, so it is possible you can actually contact the postulator. There is a priest or a bishop or a diocese that has the responsibility of the cause of that saint, and you can actually contact them and see if they would send you a relic. And relics cannot be sold. So if somebody is selling the relics, that's a problem. Usually what you will pay for is the container. And so a container like this type of a container usually is like $25, $30. I had a case just recently of baptism in our parish in Dallas, and they had wanted, I believe it was Saint Gemma Galgani, and they had asked about the relic, and I told them, I said, contact the postulator, and because I think she was a recent canonization, and they contacted the postulator. All they wanted, I think it was the godmother who was asking, and all she was just hoping for a decent holy card or a picture that she could frame and give her godchild. And they actually sent her like a relic, and it was a first-class relic. And so she was shocked. So, but with the new saints, that's a part of it, because although it's difficult to get relics from, the saints, especially the older saints that are very popular, because, hey, it's a human body. There's only so much to go around. And so it's difficult to get those relics. But with the newer and more recent saints, it is much more possible and doable. Other, as far as like other relics that are very, or not, I guess relics, but third degree would say. So this is oil that is from the lamp of that burns above the tomb of Saint Mercurius in Egypt, and his bones are wrapped in cloth, and it is changed out every year. And so the monks give out these little like holy cards with the cloth, with a fragment of the cloth cut out, so that this was wrapped around his bones, so this can be taken to the taken home as a remembrance, and also as something to place before you in prayer. And then, locally, just looking at our own American things, there is, from the Church of Chimayo in New Mexico. So you can get some of the earth there from where the cross that was found miraculously shining and planted in the ground in the early 1800s. So you've got blessed, and literally it says it, blessed dirt. They need to get a better PR person. I don't think blessed dirt is a selling factor. And then, these little baggies are from the Garden of Gethsemane. And so these are, they're relics in different ways, not necessarily the body of a saint or bone fragment, but, it's just like, it's holy ground. So, from Gethsemane or from Chimayo, or, the oil from a tomb, from a lamp that's lit by the tomb. All these are different ways. The main purpose of these relics, they're not good luck charms. They're just meant to be ways to help us focus on the people close to God who are our friends too. They're friends with God because they're close to God. They're our friends. Indeed, they're more than friends. They're family. They're brothers and sisters through baptism. And so that closeness, these are mementos. They are not meant as souvenirs or artifacts, but rather reminders of this unique relationship that transcends time and place, that connects people from hundreds of years ago to each one of us. And we have patron saints through our name. We have patron saints, through our ancestry, where we come from. All these different holy ones, this cloud of witnesses, they're a part of our journey. And so, the relics, they're, unfortunately, they have a colored history. But when we look at them today, they're very special, and they're not something that is, weird or gross or whatever anyone else might say. It still is regarded by many as kind of a weird thing, but they don't understand what this is. They don't understand what these items mean for us as individuals, as Christians, but also as communities, a church that has, a piece of their patron saint with them. That's very important. A church that prays over a fragment of bone that is from a martyr. That's all very important. It connects us. It connects us to each other, connects us to God. So I'll open the floor to any questions. I think the problem with the Shroud of Turin has been the involvement of people who are not scientific in their approach, but rather they're looking to prove that it is a fake. And that greatly, not only did it damage the process, the historical evaluation, but it also damaged the trust of the church. And so now the church is less interested in collaborating with science in this, because they feel like they're being targeted. And so I understand that. I think that is one of the problems. But the Shroud of Turin is and I didn't bring it up because it is a topic unto itself. It is absolutely fascinating, and the more you explore the research of individuals who have dedicated decades to this specific piece of history, the more confused you get, because there are so many different pieces of evidence that show it could really be real. That's I think that's a great thing, that after, even though they tried to ruin the reputation of the actual relic, they haven't been successful, because a lot of research is showing other things. So there is, you would have to go specifically to so if you're looking at a place like let's just say Lourdes. So these basilicas, places of pilgrimage, have their own records. They keep their own records and documentation of everything that has happened there. Some of the records keeping in, especially in the older places, so the records will be a little more difficult. They might be in Latin or whatever, but that is generally an area that is still developing as far as research. Because of course you got to translate these things, and sometimes they're thinking also about, well, who is going to be interested in this? But as we know from places like Fatima and Lourdes, we know that people are interested in the miracles, and so that's why some of the ones that are featured commonly, or some of the recent ones, they're used to spread the message, to let people know what is really happening here. Yeah, that would be considered a third class relic. The one of the things that I brought is this little cross. This is a cross. This is an antique, but it's a cross that's made in the Holy Land, and there are like little circles that are behind Jesus, little dots you can see in right behind Jesus, and those are the stations of the cross. And so a pilgrim would go to Jerusalem, and they would get this cross, and then at each station of the cross they would touch it to the place. And so, and if you want, you could, I guess, with the little dot, there are little holes in the cross, you could actually put dirt if you wanted in. And so, and this was a way of, same thing, touching the holy places, and it would be a third class relic. The best place to keep them, it's good to have a dedicated place of prayer where you have like your most important items, like your family Bible, where you could have the palm branches, your holy water, kind of a domestic altar. And I think that's the best place to have everything together. There's nothing wrong with scattering things around in the home, but every home needs a focal point, place where, if you say to your kids, hey, let's go pray, where you're going. It's not like choose a corner. So it's always good to have that focal point. And this way, when you go by that, when you walk in front of it, it's a little reminder of God's presence in your day to day and what you're doing, where you're, if it's cleaning or just, doing your regular tasks, there every time you walk by in front of the icon, in front of the relics, in front of the holy water, you're reminded that he is indeed present. Yeah, I don't know what the rule is when it comes to the incorruptibles. Um, most of the incorruptibles, I think, have at least some sort of a wax covering. So there is some protection. Even though when you get to like some of the older saints, so Saint Rita of Cascia, her body is, you would say, almost has like a mummified type. The skin is very leathery, like very tough. But she died 600 years ago, so it's still incredible how she's preserved. So I think some of that is going to be determined more by local tradition or what is permitted in that church or diocese or pilgrimage place. I know in some places, like we went to the monastery of Saint John of Rila in Bulgaria, and they had on now his body was all bone, but they had a cover on his skull that was like a face, and there was a little square open, and that's where you could kiss. You could kiss. I mean, but the monks were there, and they specifically, they pointed where you could kiss. It was a very guided religious experience. But that kind of thing, you'll find that in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe, you'll find more of that. I think in Western Europe, it'll be a little less direct. So I completely forgot that I had also I had a couple of photographs that I did want to share just to help with understanding some of this. Okay, so this is the Munich Museum's head of John the Baptist. And if you look at the bottom, underneath where I guess would be like his chest, so there's actually a sign that says Cranibus Ioannis Baptisti. So that's how that is preserved. So there is a skull in it, but in the museum they don't they leave it covered up out of respect. And then the other that I wanted to share. So this is this is a photograph from the mosque, the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, with the shrine of John the Baptist as it is today. And then I have another photograph that actually is looking through the green glass, so you can see the sarcophagus, which contains the head of John. And the photograph, it looks green because there's a green glass and green light, and so it kind of puts it in a little ethereal view. Another relic, when you go to the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, so they have, and this is under the Turkish Sultan, they have the right hand of John the Baptist in a reliquary that was made by the Byzantines. The inscriptions are in Greek. And so, and it's very interesting to see the Sultan actually had a little mosque that also held a number of relics, including a small chair which Muhammad sat on, a number of hairs from Muhammad's beard, and the right hand of John the Baptist. And so it's kind of interesting, you know, when you see that that flow over, you know, that's like, okay, this is John here, you know, and then John also in the great mosque of Damascus. So yeah, so that was a little bit. Sorry I forgot the pictures. I should have inserted them. It would have made the whole experience a lot more pleasant. Other questions or? No, no. No, he did not. And I think that generally speaking, the different churches are kind of okay with the naming of a church after a saint. Although within Lutheran churches, it kind of depends which end of Lutheranism you're in. In Episcopal churches, so there are saints, but there really isn't any process of canonization. And so you get saints who were not Episcopal. And so, you know, case in point is there's an Episcopal community here close by that is dedicated to Saint Oscar Romero, who was a Roman Catholic bishop. So it's kind of like, okay, well, so it kind of, but that's because they don't have a specific process. And so they kind of very openly recognize, you know, the holiness of a person. So, but but within generally speaking in Protestantism, saints and relics are still a problem. Okay, so next week we're going to begin a 3-part look at worship, and specifically beginning with the early Christian experience, but kind of the general, a little bit more general. So I'm not going to go into controversial stuff, but we'll touch a little bit on what is done in East and West, and generally speaking, next week is going to be the preparation. So what happens before liturgy or before Mass? And, you know, and we're talking also about the spiritual preparation, but also the place and, you know, how the altar is set up, things that are done that are a part of the tradition and where they come from, looking also at some of the older historical fonts that talk about worship. And then, so that's the first part. The second part in 2 weeks is going to focus on liturgy of the word. And we're going to look at where that comes from, because that is the most Jewish part of our worship when it comes to the understanding of what Jews still do pray today as the study of scriptures. And then the third part will be the liturgy of the Eucharist, looking at some of the parts of that, how it is done east-west, a little bit of comparison, but also just getting a grasp on what is done, what it means, because there are a number of keywords in the liturgy of the Eucharist which are perhaps a little bit confusing, and so we'll explore some of that. Okay? Have a good evening, and we'll see you next week. Good night.